Shut up and sit down.
Breakfast Bends with Brian Metzer, our weekly hockey podcast, which sadly is coming to an end for the season, the regular season and the postseason, because for the third straight year, the Penguins are one and done in the playoffs. They will not advance to the second round after losing to the Islanders in 6 games. The playoffs continue without the Pens. And joining us one time before we get to the offseason, or one last time before we get to the offseason, is Brian Metzer from the Pittsburgh Penguins Radio Network. Mets, this has all come to an end too quickly yet again for the Penguins, hasn't it?
It certainly has. And whenever, I'm looking at the last week, I just put the fact that we get some concert announcements as something to smile about, Tim, because the hockey certainly wasn't. It was ending far sooner than any of us anticipated. I know you and I joked last week that they may be out of the playoffs by the time we met again, and lo and behold, we were prophetic in that statement. It's unfortunate we're not so accurate when it comes to Powerball numbers and things like that. But another, just playoff series sees them go quietly into the night, and this one I think feels a little different than the last couple years, while at the same time having some of the same hallmarks. And it's a shame because they look to be a deep, skilled hockey team that seemed to have a long run in them if they could get the appropriate matchups, and unfortunately it looks like they did not.
What is the right matchup?
That's the $1 million question. It seems as if when they have these flameouts, it always happens to be against a defensive-minded team, one that takes away the middle of the ice, one that slogs it down. And I know the Islanders played a little bit more loosey-goosey than anybody anticipated, and you would have thought the Penguins would have thrived in that situation. But unfortunately for them, Ilya Sorokin was up to the challenge, and he didn't allow them to score enough goals. But if I'm looking at this, it looks like Barry Trotz, Claude Julien, guys like that have the elixir to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this is now 3 times in a row that Trotz has found a way to beat Mike Sullivan after he lost twice to him in the back-to-back Cup years. So I don't know what the best answer there is. Yes, there's a healthy dose of physicality from the opposition mixed in, but you would think they would still find a way to overcome it. And based on them really kind of outplaying the Islanders at times for stretches over, in 5 of the 6 games, it looked as if this was going to be the year that they got through it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for them, and I think the goaltending played a role in that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, by the time we get to opening night for 2021-22, like the fall, whenever that might be, whenever they get around to ending this season and starting the next one, what is your belief that we will see all 4 of Mike Sullivan, Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang back with the Penguins?
Well, if the last 24 hours have told us anything, I think that there's a better than average chance that all 4 will be there. If one of them isn't by some weird happenstance, it will probably be one of the players. But I think that core is going to be given another opportunity here. And it sounds like, by all accounts that you're hearing from Canada and around the hockey world, that they've decided to bring Mike Sullivan back. I thought that would be one of the easiest changes for them. And I'm not saying I pin this on him by any means. However, 5-15 in the last 20 playoff games, 1-4 in the last 5 playoff series. They haven't won a playoff series since the year following the last Stanley Cup in 2017. And that was just the opening round. So it's almost Tomlin-esque at this point. You can have great regular seasons, but you've got to be judged on what you accomplish in the playoffs. And this group has just not been able to get it done for 4 years now. And I thought that Mike Sullivan played a role in that, based on some decision-making, based on maybe not having answers for what the other teams are doing, led by guys like Barry Trotz. But that said, this year, I mean, if you look at fancy stats and all the analytics, Tim, they largely led all of those categories in a pretty substantial fashion. So that seems to be something that is considered, pretty important in the realm of NHL hockey now. So I guess they decided that Mike Sullivan is doing something right, and they're willing to give him another chance to work through that contract. Also, this isn't being talked about when people say Mike Sullivan is a lock to come back. Penguins have 3 years remaining on a contract after a year in which they made very little money, and they don't want to pay 2 coaches. So there's that to consider as well.
And that's no small matter as far as decision-making goes. It's not hard to go to the public and say, well, we're keeping the guy who recently won 2 Stanley Cups and just coached a team that finished in first place. I mean, like you said, with your Tomlin analogy, the Steelers do it every year with Mike Tomlin, even though they haven't won a playoff game in 4 years. That is also something that's Tomlin-esque. You're right about the parallel between good regular seasons and then poor performances in the playoffs. But in a strange way, I wonder if Hextall and Burke being new around here actually hurts the willingness for change, whereas we all assumed it would help the willingness for change when they first got here, because they saw everything that was going right into the postseason, and then they just look at a goaltender who went belly up and say, well, I mean, what do we really have to change? Just got to change the goalie. I worry about that. I wonder if Tristan Jarry played so badly it blurs the perception of everything else.
Well, I think there's a big part of that will happen, Tim. I mean, it's kind of hard to overlook his contributions here. I mean, they were minimal. I think that he contributed far more to losing the 4 games than he did to winning. And when you see this Penguins team carry a lead into the third period in 4 of 6 games of the series and still found a way to lose 2 of them, in which you can kind of point a finger at Jarry in most of those circumstances, it does blur the perception a little bit. But for me, I mean, there were other warts, there's no doubt about it. I think that the goal scoring went into hibernation. They only had one guy with 4 goals, just a handful with 2, and nobody else had more than 1. So, and also when you look at the big guys, Sid, Gensel, Rust, etc., they just didn't do enough. Now, that said, they had their scoring opportunities, and we can't downplay what Ilya Sorokin did against them. However, I have long said you cannot continuously go out in the playoffs simply because you ran into a new pandemic that's not new to the Penguins called hot goalie syndrome. They constantly have this happen, be it Tuukka Rask, Henrik Lundqvist. We saw it with the Islanders a couple years ago. Holtby played very well against them, and they've seemingly been outplayed in net in a handful of these years in which they've lost playoff series. So there are changes that can be made. You can graft on some physicality, but I don't know that knee-jerk reactions are needed here. But I do think that you're onto something with saying that the Jarry performance will blur a little bit of that. I think they will bring back a large portion of this roster. I hope that they do just retool it in a way to maybe get a little bit of what has been lost with losing guys over the years, such as Chris Kunitz, even the Kuhnockles in the bottom 6. Scott Wilson was an effective bottom 6 player, and maybe that opens up some ice for guys like Sidney Crosby and Brian Rust to score some more goals in big situations.
You know what, though? The hot goalie thing just drives me insane because, like, Martin Jones was hot when he went against the Penguins, too. Pekka Rinne was hot when he won against the Penguins, too. Vasilevsky came in for Bishop, and only because of him did that series go 7 games, I think. If Bishop stays in there, maybe they beat him in a sweep or something,
Yep.
They've beaten hot goalies before. Every time you lose, it's not because of a hot goalie, for crying out loud.
Or a cold one, Tim, on their side.
Yeah, especially since, you look at the numbers, and they were averaging like 2.07 goals against or 1.96 goals for going into the 5th game against the Islanders. So, they don't score in the playoffs anymore, period.
Yeah, it's been anemic. This has been a pretty ugly run over the last 3 years specifically, and I think that they've just got to find a way to do it. And I know a big part of this, and I'm not even just crediting Sorokin for all of this. I'm just throwing it out there as that's what people will hang their hats on. Oh, another hot goaltender. But Tim, if you think about this, even in the game with 50 shots, they didn't get near enough traffic in front of the net. They didn't take his eyes away. There was a play in that game in which Evgeny Malkin circled into the high slot, opening up a beautiful shooting lane for himself, looking every bit the best version of Gino that we would have seen in the playoffs. He got his wheels going. He comes into that lane, opens up the shot, and Jason Zucker's in front, and he steps out of the way of the shot rather than take away the goaltender's eyes. So they need to find somebody to get back into that Patrick Hornquist role, and I think that nobody is paying near as much service to the loss of that kind of player. They just didn't have guys to work as hard in front of the net. And I'm not saying this team didn't work hard, but they were getting their butts kicked in front of the net. And they weren't doing a good enough job of clearing the front of their own net either. So in both areas, they were losing battles that were instrumental in them not scoring, as well as resulting in goals against their goaltender, who looked like he had been shell-shocked.
Yeah, I don't know what they do with Jari, and I don't know what they do to replace him, because I don't know who takes him, and I don't know who they get. So goal is a huge question right now.
I would agree, and I know I heard Double M mention this about a week ago, just speculating, if you were going to trade a big asset or a first-round pick down the line or something, why don't you give a call to the Anaheim Ducks and try and get a John Gibson? And I'm hoping he can talk that into reality. But I don't think that the Ducks would look at the Penguins and say that there are assets enough to give up a franchise goaltender. So to your point,
is Jake Gensel an asset enough?
I think it would be part of a package that could open an eye, but I don't think he alone gets that deal done. And I don't even know that they are willing to do it because they have a number of young players in that organization. They have some old guys that are about to move on, but they have some youngsters that they feel strongly about. So when you look at the Penguins situation with Tristan Jarry, this is a guy that, yeah, he was fine in the regular season, but he had his ups and downs. He didn't play sustained bad like he did in the playoffs over the regular season, but he did have those moments where he hemorrhaged some goals. And you wonder if this broke him at all. I mean, there's been guys over the years in the NHL, Tim. Jim Carey comes to mind, who was a Vezina winner at one point for the Washington Capitals. And once he ran into a couple of buzzsaws, specifically a Penguin team with Mario Lemieux on it at one point did a number on him, he was essentially never the same. And you wonder if Jarry can still harness the skill that they believe he has. So I think that one of the biggest mistakes, and I can't blame them for it, that was made was they let themselves get talked out of looking at veteran goaltending heading towards the trade deadline based on what DeSmith and Jarry did through March and the early stages of April. And they, honestly, the biggest thing that happened too was DeSmith got hurt, because I guarantee you he would have found his way into the net potentially for the game 6, maybe even before that, based on what we were seeing. But Mike Sullivan had no faith in Maxime Lagacé. So I'm thinking that a goaltender, even just a veteran one, maybe a more nondescript name comes up. Elliot Friedman threw out Jonathan Quick the other day just because of his relationship with Ron Hextall. I don't know what he has left in the tank, but I do think they have to address it, because I don't think you can go into another playoff with Jarry as the number one man until he proves to you otherwise. And right now, the evidence we have about him in the playoffs is not good.
Brian Metzer with us. What do you think of Bruins Islanders so far?
It's been a fun series. I thought it was intriguing to see the Bruins come out and take game 1, and I was waiting for the Penguins haters to come out and say, it's not that hard to score on them. But then again, once we hit game 2, the Islanders did a more effective job, and they were shutting them down until they didn't shut them down in the third period. I would say largely it came from a bad penalty and then a bad turnover is why the Islanders won. But you can say the same thing about how the Islanders beat everybody. They take their opportunities and they cash them in, and it's usually enough to get themselves even in series and maybe make a run in series. So it's going to be very intriguing moving forward, specifically with all the talk about Tuukka Rask dealing with a number of injuries. Does Swayman get into the mix here? Do we see him play some games against the Isles? And is Barry Trotz going to continue to kind of move the goaltending around? He went Sorokin in game 1. He went back to Varlamov in game 2. And I just love the chess match that's happening there between he and Cassidy. I think that's going to be fun to see how it plays out. And if Cassidy outduels Trotz, I think that puts a magnifying glass more on this situation as to why Mike Sullivan can't continuously outduel Trotz, and it goes the other way.
Mets, you mentioned the concert lineup. That does give me hope for positive life in the future. Slipknot coming in October. We also saw Kiss, right, in July. Is that right? With David Lee Roth opening?
Yeah, I think they're keeping that date because that was scheduled pre-pandemic and they pushed it to this year. So that's in effect. I'm trying to think what else I saw now. I will say this, Tim. I don't have high hopes for next year's stadium concert with Motley Crue and company due to a video I saw of Vince Neil performing. He played his first concert with his solo band just sometime over the last Memorial Day weekend here, and he didn't sound great. I saw some videos in which he was okay, but then he hit Girls, 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 which was the 14th song of the set. During the first set of verses, he pretty much said, "Sorry, my voice is shot. I haven't done this in over a year." And he walked off the stage and the backing band finished the song.
Oh my.
So if that's the kind of Vince Neil we're getting, that's not good news for Motley Crue. Nikki Sixx cannot be pleased. You have 3 other bands on that bill, starting with Joan Jett up through Def Leppard and Poison, and they all have strong vocalists. They will blow the headliner off the stage unless Vince gets it together. But I am excited about some of the announcements we're getting, and Slipknot in October. We just have to hope we don't get screwed by a Penguin schedule, because I have a feeling there will be a game on that night, but they don't tend to play many Fridays. Oh, one other thing, Tim. GNR and Wolfgang Van Halen, his Mammoth solo project, playing in Hershey in July, the 31st. That's one we should keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, and I will be at the concert on the 28th, Black Crowes and Dirty Honey. I can't wait.
We'll be there with you. Yeah, we're going to that as well.
You know what? I might not have a Robert Morse game to worry about on Friday, October the 15th. So,
No, your weekends are suddenly going to be a lot freer in the fall and winter than they once were, Tim. And
I just can't afford the ticket now. That's the only problem.
And yeah, you know what? You lose. Believe me, I know when the gigs start drying up, and I live that as often as you do. When you're looking at everything, and do I got this for next season? And Robert Morris is doing you a solid disservice in terms of your concert going ability.
Yeah. Mets, thanks. We'll do this over the summer as, hockey comes up. I always want to do a hockey podcast with you. I appreciate your service throughout the course of this regular season and postseason. You were there every week when I needed you, and the conversation was always fun, and you were always a highlight of the week. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it, Tim. I always enjoy these chats. It is always a blast to talk hockey with you, talk music with you, and everything else. Don't forget, we will have a fantasy football offseason coming up as well for the league we're in together. The free agency period will happen sometime in August, if I'm not mistaken, and actually the draft at the end of August. So we'll probably do that in July. But I always love these chats. Thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to kind of just speak my mind. It's a blast, and I enjoy it, so I appreciate you. Thank you.
Brian Metzer, Pittsburgh Penguins Radio Network.